Yeah, thank you so much. So since March 17 that we planned our Pareto, inter-college fest, but after that, in a few weeks' time, things have changed dramatically, and we are into this extraordinary times in which, this is basically a human tragedy, and the government, both the fiscal and monetary policy authorities, are trying to respond to this crisis. It's a question of life versus livelihood, but the government cannot be sequential in doing that. We will tackle the corona-related life or the human tragedy first, and the livelihood loss and the migration crisis later, then it is going to be very costly. So this is the first point I want to flag, that we cannot be delayed in framing the policies for this humanitarian crisis, and we need it like yesterday to tackle this crisis. And so far, what has happened in the monetary and the fiscal front is that what we are grappling with the loss of economic growth. Of course, the great lockdown policy was announced, and its impact is primarily on the economic disruptions, the supply side disruptions. But along with that, if we close our eyes to the humanitarian crisis, then it's going to be costly, because before coronavirus hit, there may be many starvation related deaths that can happen if we won't deal with this ongoing labor crisis. And this humanitarian thing I want to put in upfront before we talk about how we deal with the economic disruptions. And of course, the public finance is in crisis. The financial markets are in turmoil. And if you look at the role of state, primarily we are dealing with the excessive policing, the lockdown strategy. But here we have to rethink that what exactly is the role of state in the context of unprecedented crisis. We have to focus more on public health. We have to focus more on the science and technology, but so far it has not yet happened due to two reasons. One, we forgot that when we frame our public policy, it has to be primarily beyond growth paradigm. But so far, what we thought is that everything was, our end or our objective of the policy paradigm was economic growth. We have not spoken anything beyond economic growth. So when a human crisis or a humanitarian crisis hit us, this is what is that restrained policy space. We have to rethink. And second is the basic macroeconomic framework of our country. And I know that many of the students can appreciate that there was a transition from the policy discretion enjoyed by the policymakers to now things are more or less into a controlled discretion framework, and it's more or less into a strict policy framework. And on the monetary policy framework, if you look at over the years, we have moved towards inflation targeting. And on the fiscal policy front, over the years, we have got into the threshold deficit GDP ratio. It's not exactly like the Maastricht Treaty. India may have philosophically different savings-based paradigm to do this, but our policy space is constrained because now everything is rule-based. So let's unpack what exactly the way in which government responded to this crisis, both the policy fronts in monetary and fiscal. Let's look at the monetary policy. Monetary Policy Committee, they have announced the policy rate, the repo rate just reduced to 75 basis points to 4.4%. They have also announced that there will be a liquidity ease, and they have infused around 3.74 lakhs crore liquidity into the system. So basically, they are grappling with reducing the policy rates and also inducing liquidity to the system. And also they wanted to nudge the market a bit. So what they announced is like widening the monetary policy rate corridor. They raised it to 0.65 from 0.65 from 0.5. And the other regulatory easing like moratorium they have got into, and also one important announcement by the RBI was they reviewed the limits of monetization. And here the ways and means advances that limit to the state governments and the union territories, they reviewed the limits increased by 30%. This is a very important thing. This is to increase the fiscal space of the subnational governments. And here, if you unpack this announcement by the monetary policy authorities, first thing, let me flag that this is not sufficient because the enormity of the crisis, we cannot just tackle by reducing the repo rate. And if you look into the repo rate also, you can see that the repo rate is reduced to 4.4. Our inflation target is 4%. So are we getting into a zero interest rate regime? When I talk about the zero bound interest rate or the negative interest rate, you can appreciate that the impact is huge. That the monetary policy as a counter-cyclical policy tool will stop totally functioning. So what is now required is a fiscal dominance. So we can think in two strict pathways. One is we have fiscal policy makers make the first move or give them the first mover advantage, and the monetary policy authorities follow. The second path to tackle the corona pandemic is let the fiscal policy makers, they move first and don't allow an unpleasant monetary arithmetic or unpleasant monetary announcement should happen. So let me explain this a little more. What is exactly the unpleasant fiscal arithmetic? We are getting into a policy decision that the central bank will be the prime mover, and we believe in the central bank independence, and the fiscal policy makers move. Am I audible? Because I can hear, there's some disturbance. Am I audible?
No.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Yes, it's clear.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, thank you. So, unpleasant fiscal arithmetic is we have the central bank independence and the fiscal policy authorities just supplement what's happening at the monetary policy level. On the other hand, what is an unpleasant monetary arithmetic is the fiscal policy makers will upfront take the decisions and the monetary policy authorities follow. So in the context of the corona virus pandemic, I do prefer the fiscal redominance because the monetary policy as a counter-cyclical policy tool failed to function properly, not only because of what you call the zero bound or the negative interest rate, but because of other things as well, other dimensions as well to trigger the economy. And if you ask me, what exactly could be a correct policy package to impact or to trigger the economy once we start doing the exit process, to me, it's like announce not just 1% of GDP, what we announced as a corona pandemic fiscal response, but here, the argument I heard among the the economic advisors in the 15th Finance Commission of 2 days back, that it's not the size that matters when you respond to the crisis of the package, it's what the content that matters. But to me, I think this content as well as the size matters because Indian government, we formulated a fiscal policy package which is 1% of GDP. And that is quite stringent when you compare to US or the other countries in which the pandemic package was just around 10% of GDP. So now we have to deal with economic disruption plus the humanitarian crisis. Let's have a look at the 12 points our government has already announced. This 1% of GDP, what exactly is that? They have primarily focused on the basic income concept. They have designed that we will be giving the basic income. But if you look at it, it is just 500 rupees per head. Is it enough? Is it sufficient? When we talked about, the universal basic income transfers or the cash transfers. It's not just sufficient. And look at the other things they announced. And there is a continuity. It's not just the fresh announcement that is what is this 1% of GDP. If you can map what is announced with the demand for grants of the union government budget 2020, many of the programs were already announced in the budget. So it was not a fresh package, it was a continuity. Look at that regarding energy infrastructure given to the poor families using the LPG subsidy. This program was already on board with the demand for grants from the petroleum and the natural gas. So it's not a new thing that the energy infrastructure gender budgeting program, but of course this matters a lot, but it was not a fresh announcement. Then look into the other food subsidy programs. And we have enough food grains in our country, but the decision has not yet been taken properly to release the food grains to the state governments. And the next component is the NREGA, when the government acting as the employer of last resort. So here what has happened is, just there was an announcement of a nominal revision in the minimum wage program or the job guaranteed wages. So it's just 20 rupees for the rural and the urban. So these were, if you look at it very closely, it's just partial, or I feel that these are just token provisions, or these are just the announcements, just upfront enough to tackle this crisis. So these are the questions coming to my mind. The other elements, if you look at, we have the district mineral fund as a part of the national mineral policy, and the use of these funds will be for tackling the crisis. So this is like the state governments have a major role to play here. Here the policy design is in the cooperative federalism framework, and the states are doing a heavy lifting. But if the center is adequately giving states the package, the financial package yet, this question we need to ask. My answer is, it's no. And mainly, the intergovernmental fiscal transfer has a major role to play here. So the 15th Finance Commission is going to submit their document, their final report in October. So are they thinking in these lines? Because our budget, the numbers, they are no longer credible, because after the announcement of the union budget, things have changed dramatically. So are we getting into a new kind of budget estimates or the revised estimates to tackle this crisis? Is 15th Finance Commission reworking their numbers because the economic growth and the other forecasting is no longer relevant, and we need to plan differently in this high frequency or the dynamic situation that's happening last few weeks. And if you look at the morbidity and the mortality data, you can see that the numbers are not credible. We have not gone for the aggressive testing yet. So when we try to formulate the exit strategy, are we ready to go back to work, or a second kind of a peak, things hit by late June, July? We don't know, are we ready? When are we ready to open the economy? Because if we are not ready to open the economy, primarily to save lives, that we have announced a great lockdown. But in this lockdown, are we doing the preparedness sufficient enough that we can open up? These are the non-transparent things we have to deal with. Because here, when a crisis in the economy, it's not only the personal characteristics of a leader that matters, but how we respond in terms of institutions, in terms of the responsibility and the public policy package equally matters. So these are the uncertainties, or these are the non-transparent things we are seeking. The answer we have not yet got, not yet received. So these are the kinds of questions we need to ask, that are we ready for an exit strategy? If that is really, what exactly is that exit strategy? These are the questions I really don't have an answer. Now, the biggest problem here is the fiscal constraint, or the public finance constraint in which we announce a program. Here, two things matter. One is the level of the fiscal deficit we have in our country. Second is how we are going to finance this extra public expenditure, or how we are going to finance this deficit. So two questions. One is the existing FRBM framework, the fiscal responsibility and the budget management framework. They visualized that we should not be spending more than 3% of GDP. Our deficit GDP, that limit, the threshold limit is 3%. Should we not thinking about a new numeric ceiling to face this and to design programs? This is first question. If so, what could be that new way of financing the deficit? And globally, there is a re-emergence in the thought process of how to finance the deficit. And there can be three main ways of financing the deficit. One is what we are doing right now, that is by the bond financing of deficit. The second is what we are thinking about is a little bit of monetization of deficit, like we are directly getting the money from the RBI to finance the deficit. And this, from the Monetary Policy Authority's point of view, also they are thinking about, like our Ben Bernanke has floated the idea of the helicopter money. And that's why he was called the helicopter Ben. So the helicopter money is nothing but you do a MFFP, that is money financing of your fiscal program. So are we getting into this, like the single-rate financing of your fiscal deficit? And the third way to finance your deficit is to go external. But in India, more or less, we were financing our deficit through domestic sources of finance. We never got into a significant external financing of deficit. So when the coronavirus pandemic hit our country, so is it okay that we should be doing a bit of external financing? It's a question we need to answer, because in a way we are allowing the financial oligarchy to once again entering into the political economy of our country. And second thing is, if the composition of your forex, if you look at closely, and if it is hot money, then hot money by definition always respond to the interest rate differentials. The moment Fed Reserve increase the interest rate, then our forex will be volatile. This capital will be flighty. This hot money will be responding to the countries in which the interest rate go up. So the external financing, it's little fickle, it's little volatile. So should we be emphasizing more on the external financing, or should we be doing what we were doing in terms of domestic financing of deficit? And if that is not enough, you go ahead with your synerage. Synerage, but what I meant is, it is the change in high-powered money to GDP. So it's basically increases your high-power money, but it won't be inflationary because your economy is below potential at this moment. So should we be doing that? These are the questions I would like to flag, and love to hear from you, the perspectives of students. And another thing is, when we design this program, we cannot design this as an economic disruption or an economic crisis alone, because this is quite different from the crisis of which we faced earlier, because it was a pure economic crisis. But the present crisis is a financial crisis, it's a health crisis, and it's a macroeconomic crisis. And over and above all these, it's a humanitarian crisis. So when it is a multiple crisis, the way we have to deal with, the economists cannot take any decisions in isolation. We have to take the high frequency feedback from the public health experts. So that's the way we need to tackle this. That's the difference between the existing crisis when we compare to the other macroeconomic crises we dealt, including the Great Depression or the global financial crisis that hit in 2007-8. It's quite different. And it's primarily a human tragedy. It's primarily a humanitarian crisis. So we cannot take any decisions in isolation. So when they make this economic models, and if the students are interested in doing this models or the macroeconomics of this coronavirus pandemic, you can read the e-book by the Center for Economic and Policy Research, CEPR. And that's a wonderful ebook, and you get several kinds of models in which you predict that what is its likelihood or likely impact on the economy. But these models have limitations because whether you are using sophisticated econometric models or not, these are limitations because one, the things are dynamic. Second, we are not taking into consideration of the humanitarian package which we need to deal with, because these models are just confined to the economic growth models. And if you look at the IMF prediction, and a few days back, Geeta Gopinath has announced, based on their World Economic Outlook, that the world is going to suffer, the world global growth. There is a drag on global growth, and it's going to fall by -3%. And that's what is a major revision over a short period of time that has happened in the global growth. And she also presented a few base scenario, alternative scenario in which if the pandemic fades in the second half of 2020, what could be the policy action taken by the world, and what could be that rebound or the recovery we can face. And she was like quite optimistic, and the world will recover to 5.8%. That's what IMF predicted. But we don't know, because the cumulative loss to the global GDP over 2020 and 2021 from this crisis was something to, it's enormous. It's like $9 trillion. And, I remember that Geeta was mentioning that it is greater than the economy of Japan and Germany combined. So this enormity is what we are going to deal with. And emerging markets and the developing markets have added, challenges, because we need to tackle this labor crisis as well. So one thing which we can think about is a little bit of discretion coming into the policy making. Because if we are strict about the rules that we will not go beyond 3% of GDP, our deficit, then we are going to be in trouble. And on the monetary policy front, we are just focusing on the inflation targeting, and the monetary policy authorities are supposed to do only the price stability at this moment. So we need to rethink about the macroeconomic policy framework of our country to face this crisis. One moment, I'll just take the water. Yeah, and if you look at the inflation targeting framework, and it is based on your inflationary expectations, the inflationary anchor, which is 4%, and also you have a concept. And this is quite a tough thing to grapple with. This. What exactly is the output gap? It's a macroeconomic uncertainty. It's a difference between your potential and your actual GDP. And as I have spoken a few days back to the students, of the Delhi University only, this output gap, the potential output, we work with the econometric methodology. Like we use filters and take out the cyclicality in the series, and the variables, the trend of that variable, we call as the potential. And it's an econometric sophistication, and we don't have a prominent or a safe tool to work and arrive at a potential GDP. So this macroeconomic uncertainty, it's very hard to measure. So these are the kind of policy constraints which we face when we grapple with the modeling, when we arrive at the policy making responses. So to wind up, what I want to urge the government of India is to just scale up. Given the enormity of the crisis, just scale up the policy response, both on the the RBI side and on the fiscal policy response side. To scale up, what are the essential things which we need to deal with? One is, of course, the human crisis, the public health, infrastructure. Right now, we have the public health expenditure, which is less than 1% of GDP. So how we can face a crisis? So I think we need to think not in terms of the insurance, but in terms of revamping the health sector infrastructure, whatever it takes to protect the medical professionals. So this is the important, that is the prime thing. Second is the job crisis or the intermigration crisis. And it's in the forefront. and we know the exodus happened, and we know the crisis, and there should not be, many starvation deaths that's happening in our country, because international migration and interstate migration both are the functions of central government. So what the central government, or what's the plan of the central government to tackle with the interstate migration, which we have to wait and see. And already we are late, and it's going to be costly. And third component of the public policy package is the impact of this lockdown on small firms. They are dried. The liquidity infusing into the system, by the monetary policy authorities, is it enough? Or what else we need to protect them? The small firms. This is the third point which we need to deal with. So these policy package, and the fourth one is we don't entertain employer of last resort policy at the moment because it's a lockdown. So we need to infuse universal basic income. The basic income transfers into the economy. Because if you're asking me this question, the Perotive Festival, I would have talked more in favor of participation income rather than basic income. But after that, within a few weeks' time, things changed. In this great lockdown era, I would go for the universal basic income than participation income. Participating is the people participate in the economy and earn an income. But basic income is, it's a compensation transfer. It is done when the automation, displaces your labor. But right now, you don't have a job, you lost a livelihood. So this is a right moment in which you have to give, income transfers, but not 500 rupees per head. That's just tokenism that we need to deal with that, and to plan. I don't know whether we are still in denial. I don't know whether we have, deciphered the enormity of the crisis. So these are the kind of pessimism or pessimistic thoughts I have in mind. But of course, lockdown is the powerful strategy in which we have to deal with the crisis. India went ahead with that lockdown strategy, but the preparedness in which we have done, and the preparedness in which we have to open the economy through the exit strategy, all these things, I hope we will get an announcement or a policy package very soon. And with that hope, let me stop here, and would love to listen to your voices, and will try to respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insight into the details of the monetary and fiscal responses. I'm expecting few questions from the students. Bhumika, if you can just see.
Please, I would request you to take the session forward.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your vision with us, and that was truly insightful, and we hope to fight this pandemic soon along with a more or less stabilized economy. The discussion is now open for queries, so if anyone has any questions, they can use the option of raise hands on their screens.
I think there's, okay.
The first question is from Shivani Chauhan. Shivani Chauhan, please ask your question.
Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, Shivani.
Yeah, Shivani. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, good morning, ma'am. I want to ask a question about China. Actually, after this pandemic, is China going to improve, or what are the economic impacts for China? Like, is it beneficial for China? Like, as you said, how it's going to impact China in terms of growth?
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Can Can I respond to Shivani?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Shivani,
Yes.
thank you so much for that question, because my talk is focused on India. So you were worried a little bit of what's going to happen in China. Of course, there are a lot of literature and a lot of studies coming on this coronavirus. And, if you look at the literature, uh, it's changing. The focus or the epicenter of the crisis right now, it's not China. It has shifted to the G7 countries. Of course, it has started in China, but now, the latest news is that it has shifted to G7 countries. And I've seen that tweet. If you are in Twitter, you can just look into the numbers tweeted by Professor Kaushik Basu. He was talking about the latest data of the morbidity and mortality statistics. And I'm just opening that. And he reported that the COVID deaths per 10 million population, if you look at the Spain, it's 5,190 deaths. In Italy, it's 4,580. And this is compared with the testing per 1 million population. So if you look at the testing, the aggressive testing figures, in Spain, they have tested 30,253 per 1 million population. In Italy, they have tested 31,603. When you compare this to India, we are nowhere near the ballpark. We are not yet gone for an aggressive testing. So having said that, let me come back to China. Of course, it has started in Wuhan. And given the way that whether this corona virus is a leveler, it's not leveler. If you look at the international diplomacy, and if you look at the international, economics, we know that the protectionist wave is quite on rise. So what's going to be the new, the kind of diplomatic relations between India and China? We need to, India and China, of course, the US and China, we need to wait and see. So the many things, the economic disruption, the supply side disruption, everything, that how China tackle will depend upon the question whether there will be a retreat from globalization exposed to this pandemic, or whether there will be an increase in the protectionist wave. So it depends on that in international economic diplomacy in which we deal with the things. So I would like to leave that point over there. But of course, we need to wait and see that how the China is going to tackle the issue. But the epicenter has definitely shifted from China, from Wuhan. Now it is to the G7 countries in Europe and in America. And thanks, Shivani, for that question. And if you have any thoughts, you can write to me, or you can just add to it. Thanks, Nikita. Thanks, Shivani.
Next question, please. Next question is from Prashant Verma. Please ask your question.
मैम मुझे एक ये चीज पूछनी थी कि मतलब जैसे हमारा जो बजट है वो वैसे ही डेफिशिएट में जा रहा है क्या? मतलब जैसे फिस्कल ईयर जैसे खत्म होगा, अगर इन केस उस समय कोरोना रहता है नहीं रहता वो एक अलग चीज है. जैसे अब इंडिया में हम इतनी ज्यादा इनकम भी जनरेट नहीं कर पा रहे अपने सोर्सेज से, क्योंकि मैक्सिमम सोर्सेज बंद है. टैक्सेस भी कुछ हद तक गवर्नमेंट ने हटा दिए हैं. तो क्या नेक्स्ट फिस्कल ईयर में इंडिया को प्रॉब्लम नहीं आएगी? क्योंकि इंडिया लोन भी नहीं ले पाएगा, क्योंकि और कंट्रीज भी अपनी मतलब फाइनेंशियल कंडीशंस को देखते हुए इतनी प्रेफर नहीं करेगी लोन लेना. तो आपको क्या लगता है कि मतलब इंडिया के क्या मतलब वो हो सकती है आगे नेक्स्ट फिस्कल ईयर में?
Praveen, your name is Praveen?
Prashant, ma'am.
Prashant, oh, thank you so much for that question. I understand that you have two questions. One is, what kind of internal sources of revenue requirements you have, because you are quite scared about, the investors' confidence on India, the foreign investors' confidence on India. So what is the way out? And if when you look at the budget of India also, you are quite disappointed in the sense that the tax, the collection, what they projected and what they collected is not in tandem. There is a huge gap. So I can understand your concerns. To me, you are right that this is not the time to tinker with the tax rates up or down to get more revenues to finance, the COVID crisis. Of course, it is not the time to tinker with the tax rates. But when you have a fiscal rule, to reach that 3% of GDP fiscal deficit, usually what we have done so far is not through the tax buoyancy we reached there, but through expenditure compression. And this expenditure compression policies in terms of, reducing the capital spending, that had huge repercussions on the economic growth already. And, Prashant, you need to appreciate that it is not only the fiscal crisis. You also know that there are other twin balance sheet crises we have to deal with. That's a bank balance sheet and the corporate balance sheet. So when you deal with everything, you are right that the investors look at the macroeconomic fundamentals of our country. And if the macroeconomic fundamental is not okay, they just go away, or they don't just rate it perfect. But, I don't know whether you have listened to that Bloomberg interview with the Rakesh Mohan, our former deputy governor. What he said is, first thing, you forget about how the investors or how these rating agencies rate us. Because in the context of a lockdown, the first thing you have to look up is what the rating agencies are doing on India. We need not look into that, because the investors' confidence is one thing, but we cannot, we cannot afford to be within the limits of the fiscal deficit at 3% to face this crisis. We need to, go beyond 3%. And how you go beyond? So as rightly pointed out, either we go IMF or we do it internally. And as I have spoken in my presentation, my preference would be to go for internal, the domestic financing, because we never gone for a very huge kind of a significant kind of an external financing so far. But of course, I understand that we went to this IMF recently regarding the SDR because of our, the foreign exchange reserve is quite sound and safe. But I noted that policy. But in general, if you ask me, I will be very comfortable if we do with the domestic resource mobilization. Of course, it is not through the tax, then you have to increase your deficit. And if you're increasing your deficit, you have the bond financing and you have the sewerage financing. And sewerage financing is nothing but the monetization of your deficit. And bond financing, one thing you can do is you can grapple with or play around with the maturity structure of your bonds. And if you go for the long-term bonds, you can buy time in terms of the refinancing strategies, and the risk will not be, bothering you very soon. So one is like, you go for long-term bonds. And you must have read the piece by Ratin Roy. He talks about the Corona bonds, or he also mentioned about the war bonds, which he called as consoles. So those are the kind of, the bond financing we can think about by playing around with the maturity structure of the bonds. And second thing is this money financing of deficit. And it won't be inflationary because we have done it long back. Till late 80s, we have done little bit of money financing of deficit. And that time we controlled it because it was inflationary. But right now, the governor who was nodal in that institutional reform in our country, Professor C. Rangarajan, if you follow his speech, he himself is ready to accept that monetization of deficit. It's quite relevant in the Indian context, and we can explore that possibilities. Yeah, Prashant?
Yeah, ma'am. Ma'am, one more question.
Yeah, sure.
मैम जैसे यूएसए ने पहले से ही चाइना पे एक ट्रेड वॉर मतलब पहले ही इम्पोज कर देता कि मतलब मैं ट्रेड वॉर करूंगा चाइना से, और अब जैसे ही कोविड-19 खत्म होगा ये चीज एक्सपेक्ट की जा रही है कि मतलब वो जो यूएस पूरी ही टोटली ट्रेड बंद कर देगा चाइना से, एंड इट मे फोर्स इंडिया आल्सो टू close all the trade doors with China. What will the impact on India after that?
We don't know, Prashant, what will happen because, I don't think that it's going to be a total close down. But we emerge from things, it's not going to be a total closure, but this retreat from globalization, that has got its own impact. But right now things have changed, and the corona does not have any passport or any visa. It's attacking all the countries equally, and it's not a leveler, because the emerging countries and the developing countries have to fight more than the developed countries. But how this trade is going to affect, that we have to wait and see. As you rightly pointed out, if you look at the external deficit or the balance of payment thing, I was emphasizing more on the capital account. I was talking about the hot money, but you're right that we need to look into the X minus M. That is the export minus import, that capital account and the current account deficit as well. But what happened in India quite a bit is, like, we lived even with the 4% of GDP, our current account deficit. But that time, what was happening is that we were financing the current account deficit through the capital flows. So we were alerted only when the capital flows became flighty. But I'm not arguing that the current account deficit per se is not relevant as long as we can finance it. The current account deficit is quite important. But another dimension I would like to flag here is not only China, but the Middle East. Because the kind of invisibles, the remittances we receive from the Middle East, that's also going to come down. So you're right that it's not really the capital flows, it's not really the trade, it's also the invisibles, the trade in services. We have to wait and see, but I don't visualize a total closure, that the things are going to be just closed down, because when the peak US China wave, that protectionist wave happened also, Indian government was like retorting using the customs duty, and we were quite articulate in our own thing. But there is an inconsistency there as well, because on the one side, we are projecting the economic diplomacy that there is no retreat from globalization. And on the other hand, we are responding with increasing the tariffs or increasing the rates. So we need to see what will be the emerging situation. And I don't want to preempt the possibilities by just thinking that it's going to be a total closure. I'm a little optimistic, yeah.
Next question, please. Next question is from Tanishq.
Yeah.
Tanishq, please ask your question.
Morning, ma'am.
Yeah. Tell me.
Ma'am, I want to ask about the field of the capital requirement. What will be the impact of on the capital models and the internal models, whether there is a need for recalibration or not, and what will be the impact on the potential add-ons in the lieu of the calibration changes?
Yeah, good question, Tanishq. And this capital requirements, it should not create a moral hazard. That's my biggest worry. We have gone for this recap earlier also, because regarding the Basel norms and all, if you look at, we need to do a little bit of recapitalization, but it should not be creating any moral hazard. That's my concern. But if you look at that overall, it's like a balance sheet that works there in the fiscal front. We are giving to the monetary or the banking sector. So that's the way it's happening. But, as long as it doesn't create any moral hazard, I'm okay. Because there is no other way to infuse the capital in the system. And once the capital is dried up, there won't be any economic activity. I know that vicious circle, but, I'm quite, I want to alert you about that moral hazard, that if you do it continuously, one time it could be fine. Yeah.
Ma'am, I would like to ask another question.
Yeah, sure.
Ma'am, what will be the impact on the shift of the demand on whether they will go for the lower risk assets or for the high risk assets? Because currently the stock market is currently facing the loss, and we would expect that in the future there must be a rise in the stock market. So whether they will go for the lower risk assets or higher assets.
This question is related to the financial exuberance, and Should I preempt this question? Because, there is no answer to this because it's so dynamic. Let me give it a go to this question because I don't know about this financial exuberance, what's going to happen in the stock market because we have to wait and see. I understand that this is not just the public health crisis or just the macroeconomic crisis. Of course, it's a financial risk is there, but, I don't want to predict anything at this moment. Okay, Tanish, sorry. Yeah.
Next question. The next question is from C. Pava. Please ask your question. I would request all the participants to please ask one question each so that we can accommodate more questions.
Hi everyone. My question is that we cannot stop trade with any countries after the pandemic is over. Can we expect that some of the countries will start trading with India after the pandemic is over, rather than leaving China? And if not, what are those factors that could lead to these countries stick still to China and not to India?
What's your name?
Chirag.
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 Thank you, Chirag. So your question is related to the trade, right?
Yeah.
And India's trade with the world is just it's very insignificant. No. So it's not that the trade I'm scared about. It's about the foreign direct investment and the foreign portfolio investment. And if you look at in the recent years, there is a kind of shift from the foreign portfolio investment to the foreign direct investment because the portfolio money is little hot. So that responds to the interest rate differentials. And the foreign direct investment, I think we have increased the cap for many sector-specific investments. So that trend is quite good. So I would like to focus more on that part of our balance of payment, like more into this capital thing rather than the current accounting. Because a trade with the global trade, the drag on trade, because it's not that quite significant when compared to this foreign direct investment and the foreign portfolio investment. And as long as you can finance your X minus M using the capital flows, if it is steady, if it's not flighty, then I'm happy with that. But the trade thing, I think we won't be affected much. That's what I feel. Yeah. And also, I would like to flag, Chirag, you're right. It's based on the economic diplomacy but both India and China, both are emerging economies. And we don't know how that power shift is going to happen. Yeah.
Next question is from the participant, Ms. Malini Sharma. I'm reading out her question to you, ma'am. Her question is, do you think that our government is actually likely to undertake unconventional monetary measures in the times to come, such as helicopter drop or central bank directly subscribing to corporate assets?
Oh, wonderful question, Malini. I don't know whether there is a consensus among the students. So I heard that around 200 students and faculty members are participating in our, this meeting today. So among this 200 plus students and the faculty members, I don't know how many of you approve what Malini is suggesting. But as a policy maker, if I am given liberty, I would definitely explore the possibility of money financing of deficit, what Malini suggested. It's like you print your money and spend. It's quite weird the moment I say that you print and spend, because many of you are very worried about how we grapple with the inflationary expectations. But I would like to explore the policy options suggested by Malini, because the helicopter money, there can be three variants. One is like you money finance your deficit. The second variant of helicopter money is like you helicopter drop money to the firms. And third is you helicopter drop money, like it's not exactly the basic income transfers, but you give money to the people. But have you read the quotation by Rekhuram Rajan? Because what he was arguing is that helicopter money can be effective only if the money given to the people or the firms are spent, not saved. But if the propensity to save is greater than the propensity to spend, then you are again in a policy dilemma. So this is what, what was a take by Rekhuram Rajan. But I know that there are exponents or the proponents of the helicopter money. Of course, the Ben Bernanke, the former Fed governor. Then you can also read that between debt and between debt and devil. It's by Turner. And you can also see the writings of Voiter and of course the Chicago School of Thought. You can explore that. And I would like to see this from a different perspective of monetary and fiscal policy coordination. And if you look at the currency and finance report by RBI, they are not producing the report on currency and finance anymore. The last report on currency and finance was by Sudhir Gokan when he was like the deputy governor of RBI. You take a look into that currency and money, that report, that I think it's quite a few years back, but that gives you enough clues of what exactly is the fiscal and monetary policy coordination. And there are two elements to it. One is, as I pointed out earlier, it is an unpleasant monetary arithmetic, because even if you shift your financing pattern of deficit from bond financing to the seigniorage financing, beyond a point of the seigniorage financing to the bond financing, to control your inflationary tendencies, you cannot do bond financing beyond a point if your R is greater than G. You're getting what I'm saying? R is your real rate of interest and G is your real growth of economy. So if your real rate of interest is greater than the real growth of economy, you cannot go ahead with your bond financing of deficit. You have to eventually monetize your deficit. That eventual monetization is what I mentioned as unpleasant monetary arithmetic. So this we have to grapple with. Yeah.
We'll take the last question now. If somebody wants to ask, they can.
The next question is from Anusha Gupta. Please ask your question.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, actually, I need to know about, you mentioned about supply side deficit.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, after lockdown, industries will revive their supplies. So, can we say this crisis is short-lived or something like that?
Oh, wonderful. Your name is Anusha? Anusha. What's your name? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Anusha.
Yeah. Anusha. Okay, after Malini's great question, Anusha also asked me a good question. But I look at this corona virus pandemic from three things. Like, it's not only the supply side, it's demand as well as the confidence. So it's basically the three things together. And I mentioned that you look into that, the articles in that economics in the times of COVID-19, a couple of articles you will get on these aspects that we need to grapple with: demand side, supply side, as well as the confidence. Like the way we are doing the precautionary savings, and it's affecting from three things. It's not really just the supply side alone. So it's basically the economic disruption. And your question is where we are going to get a V-shaped recovery after this pandemic. I really don't know. What economists are predicting is that it is going to be a tilted L. It's not L. L means it's very pessimistic that we will have a stabilization after that. But it's a tilted L. It's not exactly V, that we don't find a spurt in the growth or recovery, but it will be a tilted L-shaped recovery. That's what we are anticipating. That's it, because these economic disruptions, the way you design your exit strategy is very crucial. The way you get the recovery, because now the policy is just locked down. So nothing is happening. So the way you plan your exit strategy is quite crucial in getting the revival, Anusha, what you're thinking about. And yeah, I would predict a tilted L recovery. That's it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, that's my limited point. Thanks, Anusha.
As we end our question round here now, I'd like to thank you, ma'am, for sharing your views with us. And with that, I would request our teacher in charge, Bhumika ma'am, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you. I would like to thank Professor Lekha for delivering such an insightful and enlightening session. Ma'am, your leadership in the areas of macroeconomics, public finance, and fiscal policy is clearly evident through this session. I'm sure that this session would have made a lasting impact on the minds of our participants, and it would have been a wonderful learning experience for them. Now, may I also thank Dr. Shiv Kumar Sedev, Principal, Shivaji College, for his guidance and encouragement to conduct this webinar. I would also like to thank all the faculty members of Economics Department, and especially Ms. Anshu Chopra, who has been a constant source of guidance, support, and encouragement. Also, a big thank you to all the students who have been involved in organizing this webinar. At last, I would like to thank all the participants, and I'm sure they would have really benefited from this session. I wish safety and wellness for all of you. Have a good day, everyone. Now I would request everyone to please leave the meeting one by one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. A final word from me. Kindly share my Twitter handle with the 200 students around.
Yes.
You know, it should be the beginning of our deliberations, not the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.